the truth is, I wish I would have not taken out as many student loans as I did. I would encourage you not to take out student loans. That's kind of a mission I'm trying to get my students to avoid them at all costs because of the disaster they are, currently in America. But, unfortunately, I know all too well how they can be kind of a millstone around your neck for years to come.
You're listening to the Millionaires Unveiled podcast, where you'll hear the stories and interviews of everyday millionaires. We'll unveil their decisions, their strategies, and their current portfolio allocation. Now to your hosts, Clark Sheffield and Jace Mattinson.
Alrighty, welcome back. Another episode of the Millionaires Unveiled podcast. This is episode 176. This is Clark here along with my co-host Jace. Jace, what's going on, man? How are you?
Doing great. How you doing?
Good. We just got off an interview tonight with a guy who net worth of 1.8. He and his wife and 4 kids are living on a sailboat and sailing around the world. He started a business. It was successful. He sold it. He took the money, and now he's going to go sail for 2 years. Is that in your plans?
It is not, but it was great to listen to him describe his journey. And, as much as I love the ocean, I think I would get really tired being at sea that much. Although I do, I love cruises, and at some point I think I'll take a, longer extended cruise. But I'm happy to, pay the money, let somebody else worry about the food, let somebody else worry about, all the stuff. Kind of want to just relax, and I don't really want to charter my own boat. That's for sure. What about you?
I don't know. I mean, it never was, but it sounded pretty fun talking to him. 2 years is a long time, but I don't know. It sounded kind of fun, especially maybe later in life too. I think it sounds interesting.
I could do like a few day trip, like, myself, or like a few week trip by myself. I just don't know about that long. That's just a long time. But yeah, it'd be fun. Charter your own catamaran and just do it. Maybe that's what we should do, dude. Take the Millionaires podcast to the ocean on a boat.
Yeah, there you go. Hosted in the Bahamas. So this is episode 176. We have combined net worth of all the millionaires we've interviewed over $500 million now. So about $507 million people that have been interviewed. So pretty interesting.
I was just saying, man, $500 million. That's pretty remarkable.
Yeah. So in another, probably a couple of years here, we'll be at $1 billion. I mean, we always talk about it. One thing that surprised us is the amount of millionaires that don't pay off their home early, even though they have the cash and the flexibility, or I guess the money availability to do it. And you came across an article this week. It says 11 great reasons to carry a big, long mortgage. So a few of the reasons, it says a mortgage won't stop you from building equity. A mortgage is cheap money. Mortgages allow you to invest more money and to invest it more quickly. Mortgages give you greater liquidity and flexibility. So it's interesting to look at some of these points and think about it. I mean, it's definitely something that has interested or that stood out to me. And I think we've talked about it a few times on the shows. But I mean, Jay, 75-80% of our millionaires don't hurry to pay off their primary mortgage?
Yeah. I mean, it's been staggering, actually, I think, because I think there's this connotation that millionaires are always out of debt, and they don't have mortgages, and they pay them off early. And the reality is we've found that not to be true. And in some cases, we've even had some retire with a mortgage, which I think is even more contrarian to maybe what we believed to be the norm. And it is interesting. And we do ask a lot of them, the guy you just mentioned right now, their primary residence that they did live in, they're renting it now, but they said they are keeping the mortgage. And I think we're finding that to be more and more the case with some of these millionaires. Maybe, I feel like when we started the show, we didn't talk to really anybody that invested in Bitcoin, right? And most of the millionaires we talked to invested or paid off their mortgage early, or, were planning to. Whereas I think now, it's 3 years later, going into fourth year, I wonder if it's just because of where the rates are and crypto and these things, have they evolved in some of our millionaires' financial lives and minds? Maybe if rates were higher, they would pay it off, because a lot of them probably have refinanced or purchased in the last, 3 to 5 years when rates have been at historic lows. So it'll be interesting to see and track, I think, over the next 5 years if we see any rate changes, and does that change the mindset on paying off a home early or not. I mean, obviously there's several that enjoy the peace of mind of having no mortgage, but there's others that say, hey, look, you know what, I can go make 3 to 5% at least on my money. So why put it into paying off a 3% mortgage?
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense when it's 2 to 3% and you're working on a 13-year bull market too. It seems like the smart decision. So when interest rates are 5% and we have another correction, that'll be interesting to see what happens after that.
Totally.
Maybe it's a better use of money. So anyway, just something interesting that we came across this week. Last week, we had an interesting interview with David. He was an engineer, but is now started investing in self-storage real estate facilities, self-storage facilities. So interesting interview with him. His net worth is right around $1 million. And again, background in engineering. Today's show, we have Jason, net worth of $625,000. He works as a college professor and is primarily invested in the market and also has some home equity. He's 47 years old and he got his first big boy job, as he calls it, at age 33, and grew up in a middle class environment. So fun interview with him coming up. Let's talk real estate real quick. If you're interested in any multifamily syndication or commercial syndication opportunities, shoot us an email. We'll keep you posted on our current listings and we'll jump on a call to connect. Always fun to connect with our listeners. And if you bring us a deal, if you have a deal, if you know of somebody who's selling or looking to sell, obviously we'll give you a finder's fee for that. So we appreciate anybody who's reached out about that. So thanks again for listening. Thanks for tuning in. And without any further delay, let's get into episode 176 with Jason.
Jason, do you want to just give us a little about your background and what you're up to now?
I am a college professor in the Northeast at a state university. I teach in the state of Massachusetts. I'm 47 years old. I'm married with one child who's 20 months. My current net worth is about as of today, is about $625,000. And that's broken up between home equity, primarily home equity and investments. And I can get into more specifics if you'd like. You know, I wrote a lot of that stuff down, went through my personal capital account and looked at everything and so forth to prepare for this. So.
Yeah, totally. Let's get into it in just a second. But I know all of our listeners are going to be wondering, what do you teach?
I teach communication studies, specifically political communication. So actually all the stuff with the election, I am one of the people that they talk to or analyze, and I'm one of the few people in the country who actually loves politics. So yeah, I'm one of those people.
Interesting. So let's get it. How did you become such a finance nerd if you're a college professor in political communications?
Yeah, I mean, it's always been kind of an interest of mine. I think when I was in graduate school, I think I really started to think about my future and so forth. I mean, I started into the workforce fairly late. I didn't get my really first big boy job, if that's what you want to call it, until I was 33. So I was, I had a series of small jobs, some professional activities for a couple of years. I took a couple of years off from graduate school and worked in a professional environment, but, didn't really start to make some substantive money until I really finished my PhD when I was about 33. But before that, I certainly followed the markets in the 90s. I was in, college at the time and everything. And I think I was also surrounded by people who had more money than I did. So I think I aspired to be them. I grew up in a middle class environment, but, you wouldn't necessarily know it. My parents still live in a very, very modest house. My dad passed away a few months ago. But, my parents we never did a lot of travel. We never did a lot of that stuff when I was a kid. So, I really didn't, I was always kind of jealous of some of the things that my friends were doing, going to Disney World or those kinds of things. My father was an alcoholic, so that he probably spent a lot of money, at the bars and everything. But he was one of the most generous people I have ever had the good pleasure, probably the most generous person I've ever met in my life. So kind of weird combination.
Yeah, totally. Sorry to hear about your father, but it's a pretty remarkable journey that you've been on to where you are now. Yeah. So let's take a little deep dive into the investments. You said $625,000. Home equity makes up how much of that, and how much is in investments?
So 180 is in home equity. Our house is valued about probably according to Zillow, 285. So maybe more like 185. And then we have about 600,000 in investments. So about 17,000 of that is my son's 529 plan. We have another about 23,000, or well, that's cash, so that's separate from investments. But we have another kind of 18,000 in my wife's retirement plans. That's kind of a mixture of the Fidelity's Total Stock Market Index Fund, and then a T. Rowe Price Blue Chip Fund. And then the rest, about 560,000 of that is mine in a Roth IRA, a 401A, and a 403B. And so that kind of, is mixed around. I have about 10% in the Total Stock Market Index Fund. That's in my Roth IRA. About 12% in Vanguard Small Cap Index. Another 12% in Vanguard Mid Cap Index. And then the rest of it, about 64%, 65% across Fidelity Growth, Fidelity Contra Fund, and the Fidelity S&P 500 Index Fund. So across those three. So the most of it is weighted toward large cap stocks. And I tried to kind of create a portfolio that was, so because I don't have the total stock market index available to me in any of my retirement accounts at work, I tried to create somewhat of a replica of the total stock market index fund.
Yeah, it's quite the array that you have there. So has the portfolio always looked like that since you started investing?
No, in my early days, when I first started out, I didn't have the availability to be at Fidelity. I was at TIAA-CREF, and I switched probably about 2 years in just because I liked Fidelity's investments better. And in the first couple of years, I was actually invested in TIAA-CREF's annuity products, which I found out after learning more about them, I'm not a fan of annuities. And then when I switched to Fidelity, I opened up a 403B, and this is where I was going to try to play around with some international stuff. So I was in an emerging market fund. I was in a Fidelity Canada fund for a couple of years, and they just weren't performing. For whatever reason, I kind of played around with that. And it wasn't until about 7 years ago when I just kind of created the mixture that I had now. So if I would have actually done this from the beginning, I'd probably have about $50,000 to $100,000 more in my investments than what I do now.
Gotcha. So just adding up your allocation here, you came up to, I think I just quickly was jotting them down, over 800,000 or so. So you have some debts.
I do. Yes, I have about $100,000 in on my mortgage, and then we have about $180,000 in student loans from my wife. So we are in the middle of paying her loans off through the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program.
Gotcha. So someone who's not familiar with that, including myself, tell us just a little bit about that and how that works.
Sure. It was created in 2007 and by the Democratic Congress and the Bush administration. And basically what it says is that if you work in public service, and public service is defined as working for the government in some capacity, so it could be state, federal, local, or tribal, or working for a 501(c)(3) organization, you can, if you make 10 years of consistent payments and you are on an income-based repayment plan, that you can have your loans forgiven at the time. Now, in 2017 is when they started to kind of, start the process for giving loans, and it has become somewhat problematic in the news. There are all kinds of stories about people who are applying, who are not getting it. I think the acceptance rate is right about, and now I think about 1.5% to 2%. So tens of thousands of people have applied, and only a handful of people have gotten it. And I'm actually one of the few people who did. So I actually have had my student loans forgiven back in 2018.
Wow. And how much?
About $57,000.
Wow. So what are they looking for? Is there something that stands out above others, or why do you think yours was accepted versus other applicants?
Well, I think part of it is because I tend to be very, very meticulous in the records that I keep. Initially when I heard about the program, I thought it was just really for people who made a lot less money than I do. I actually thought I made too much money to qualify. And I actually wasn't on one of the qualifying payment plans for a number of years. But then when I got married to my wife, and about 2014, 2015, I switched to an income-based repayment plan, and then thought I was going to, continue paying my student loans for another, because those payments prior wouldn't have counted for public service loan forgiveness because they weren't the right kind of plan. But Congress, with the new tax law in 2018 and 2017, added kind of an addendum where you could kind of get a mulligan on those previous payments. And what you had to do is you had to, document that you had made 10 years of payments. You had to submit an application and so forth. And it took a little bit of time. It probably took about 4 or 5 months of, I think I reapplied on like 5 or 6 different occasions, and finally was able to have them count those previous payments and the payments I'd been making consistently. But I'd never missed a payment. It was just something that was automatically done. I've never taken a forbearance or anything of that nature. So I just consistently made those payments, and I was able to just read up on everything that I could find. And now I actually help people at my university and other people kind of help navigate the process, because it can be an absolute nightmare trying to figure out how to do things. In fact, I was just talking with someone today about helping them with their public service loan forgiveness application.
Wow. So that 57 or 58,000 that was forgiven, was that the remainder of your student loan balance, or was it just a portion of the remainder?
No, it was the remainder of my student loan balance. I started with about $97,000 coming out of graduate school, and that was in 2006. So I paid off about $40,000 over $40,000 of principal over, at 11, 12-year period.
Yeah, good. So you, together with your wife's student loans, you guys had about 300 in student loans. Is that right?
Yeah, pretty close. Probably about 280,000, and that actually is kind of one of the reasons why this scared me, or kind of shocked me into really kind of trying to get my financial life in order, or really accelerating the process when we got married back in 2012. We got married. We had done a long distance relationship for a couple of years. And because of that, I was flying back to Minnesota, which is our home state. We were going out, we were traveling internationally, we were, doing all kinds of things. But lo and behold, I was also racking up a severe amount of credit card debt as well. So when we got married in August of 2012, things continued on for a little bit. But I remember February of 2013, just kind of waking up and I kind of knew what the numbers were, but I actually sat down with them and just started to write them down. And at the time, I think we hadn't bought our house yet. So we had probably about $280,000 to $290,000 in just debt from the student loans, credit cards, car, and some other things. And then the next year we bought a house, and we hadn't really reduced the debt that much. So I think I calculated when we bought our house in about September of 2014, we had about $470,000 in debt, and probably about, including the house, probably had about $300,000 to $320,000 in assets. So we were $150,000 in the hole in about September of 2014. Probably a little earlier. You could certainly say we were 150, 160, depending on how you calculate it. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but
so did that freak you out?
Yeah, to say the least. I was just like, how in Lord's name are we going to pay for a house, have a kid? Because my wife and I were looking to have children. We were, we had both been married before, but we were late to the party in terms of having children, and we were trying to have kids and trying to do all kinds of things at once instead of just focusing. And as you can probably imagine, trying to do everything did not kind of led to inertia and nothing. And so kind of scared me into things. And, I really started to reevaluate our finances and so forth. And it took a while to get my wife on board, because she was used to what we were kind of doing. And I was making her aware of the numbers. And I think when I did, it kind of scared her as well, and so forth. And we haven't always seen eye to eye financially, but it's got to the point now where I think she really trusts me on the path that we're going, because we've made certainly, I think, 180-degree turnaround in where we are in our financial life.
Yeah, good for you. So Just curious on that much in student loans, about 280 or so. You said, right? What's the payment on that? How much were you guys paying a month?
We were paying combined because we were on income based repayment. We were probably paying somewhere in the neighborhood of about $1,200 a month, which is right about the amount that we had for our mortgage. And, we were probably only pulling in, combined the two of us at the time, probably $6,000, $7,000 a month. So, we weren't at the time. I remember, when we first started paying my wife's student loans, we weren't even meeting the interest. I mean, we didn't even make the interest, but there's some regulations within the income-based repayment plan, which they kind of help you kind of subsidize the interest payments for a little bit until you can kind of work up to certain things with the different plan that we chose. So we weren't going deeper into debt per se, but we certainly weren't making any progress. We weren't. And then when we, made more money and so forth, we had to pay more. And so got up to the point where we make about $1,200 a month, which you can imagine on a teacher's salary and
right.
another teacher's salary. My wife was also is a college professor. It's a bit tight. It was a bit tight.
Yeah, I mean, I want to be blunt because I'm so curious, and I think other people are. How did you not get discouraged, right? I mean, if you're paying $1,200 a month and you have 280 or 270, whatever it is, did you feel like you just weren't making progress?
I think because I had lived with the student loans for a while and was counting on that public service loan forgiveness, I think we just kind of had to I just kind of grinned and bear it. But I tell you, I thought of every scheme that you could think of. I still do to pay off my wife's student loans. Like, if we just do this. So when we bought the house, and I still think about this, is that we could use that as forced savings, right? You pay down the house, and then if we ever need to, it's our back pocket for selling the home, and we can wipe out the student loans, right? So that is still if something happens, that is a strategy that we could use. But I think it was just kind of grinning and bearing it. I also started to teach a lot of extra courses. I teach some of my colleagues ask me if I actually ever sleep, and I'm not really sure. I don't know if I've slept that much in the last decade because every single semester I'm teaching 2 extra classes on top of my student loan. So it's like I have a second job, and I've had that second job for basically the last decade. But it is tiring. Plus any kind of work extra duty that I could get at work, any advising, any small little lecture, anything that I could do, I would probably pull in a few extra $1,000 a year doing that. And that would go toward investments or, other things that really to kind of help float the household for a while.
Yeah. So speaking of investments, right? So you guys have 180, right now in student loans outstanding?
Yep. 180.
And you have about 800,000 in assets, right? If you count the house. Do you ever
we have about 900,000.
Oh, about 900. Excuse me. Sorry. Do you ever think about selling some of those or liquidating them and paying off the student loans and just being done with it all?
Well, all of it is in retirement accounts for the most part. And, I don't have a lot of Roth in my, so I could take out some of those payments. So I have thought about that. If I was going to do anything, we would probably sell the house because we have enough equity and enough in cash, just probably clear everything, which we would start, we would be free. But because my wife is basically 6 years into the process, that, those last 4 years we're kind of counting on that or some potential changes coming up to the public service loan forgiveness program, where one of the changes that is floated and looks like it may actually go through is that if you work for 5 years, you can get half of your loans forgiven. Or if you work a couple years, you can get a percentage. So I don't know if we'll get to the full 10 years. I'm hoping so, to have them all forgiven. But I am anticipating that we will have some of them forgiven. And it just just kind of a budgetary kind of basis and looking at our future, it just seemed wiser to kind of put money into investments and just keep paying the student loans while we can.
Yeah, because you do have a lot in you're at what, over 500,000 in your retirement accounts, just you personally,
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Have you just been feeding money to it every year since you started working, or?
Yeah, I mean, I'm required by my union contract when I started, I had the option of taking a pension or doing a kind of what we call the optional retirement plan, which is basically a 401a. And so I'm required to contribute a certain amount to that. And then I, started in 2008, I realized I could open up a 403b, and just over time, I started just with $100 every other paycheck, and, it just kind of grew. And then a few years ago, I was able to for a couple of years, I was able actually to max out the 403b in addition to the 401a, and max out a Roth IRA. And part of it was because I was just teaching so much and taking so many duties. And my wife and I kind of have how we budget our household. She takes care of, some of the basic some of the basic things like food and, buying clothes for our son or any kind of activities he wants. And I kind of take care of the household bills. And I'm able to, with the extra classes, I'm able to put away enough money into our retirement accounts. And it also helps that we had an 11-year bull market, which certainly has helped us over the last, decade, certainly. But I certainly just decided that I was going to, force myself to save as much as I could. And, the old rule, the first rule of personal finance, pay yourself first, was something that I take to heart. So.
Yeah, I'm interested. You talk about building up the side classes. How does that work as a college professor? You're required probably to teach a minimum amount of credits, right? I believe. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then do some research on the side, obviously. So if you volunteer to teach more, you get additional money?
Yes. So what happens is there are actually, at my university, there are we're governed by two separate contracts. We're governed by our normal contract, which dictates my normal teaching load, which is 12 credits a semester, which is basically 4 classes. And then under a separate contract, it's called it's a continuing education contract. Full-time faculty are allowed to teach 2 extra courses per semester. So I've been doing that every year for the last decade, and that brings in about, not including summer teaching, that brings in about $20,000 extra dollars a year. And then if I teach in the summer, I teach another couple classes, and that brings in another about $10,000 to $15,000, depending on what's going on, plus the extra duty. So I probably bring in, of just extra side work at the school with extra classes, I probably bring in about $30,000 to $35,000 a year on top of my normal salary. I don't recommend it for everyone because it's hard, but and it took a while for me to start doing this, but I did it partly because I was trying to see my wife, my girlfriend at the time, now my wife, every month. I was flying out to Minnesota every month and taking her out to dinner and doing all this and going to places like Belgium and Mexico and stuff like that. And that cost money. And I needed the money as much. Plus I was contributing to my, my 403b and my other retirement accounts. I was trying to do everything, which, looking back on it, probably wasn't the best idea. There was probably something should have given. I should have, maybe not have put all that money on credit cards, but one of the questions that I know you've asked in your interviews are some of the mistakes you've made. Certainly that's probably one of the mistakes I made way back when. I would not recommend that route to most people. And if you're trying to woo a partner, it's not.
Hey, it worked out for you though.
It did work out. Yeah. I mean, we've been together now over a decade, and we were friends for a decade prior to that. So we've known each other for 20 years. So, and she's a wonderful wife and mother and partner and so forth. So
that's awesome.
But again, it's not the way that you probably should do those kinds of things.
So. Oh, that's awesome. So Jason, as you go forward here, where is the end? I mean, are you trying to get to a certain net worth or passive income goal as you approach your retirement years, or is that kind of too far in the distance for you right now?
No, I think, I've kind of gotten bitten by the bug of the financial independence movement. I'm pretty active on some of the boards like Choose I, Facebook, and listen to the podcasts and everything. And I've certainly gotten bit by the personal finance bug. I've actually started doing some financial coaching on the side, trying to help some teachers and everything. So I have my FI number is about 1.25 million. I figure that is just about enough, and that's in today's dollars. So, if things were to continue to cooperate with the market, we should hit that in about 5 years. but I don't anticipate to retire anytime soon. I'm not an RE person. I'm not a retire early person. I love being a college professor. I don't know if I'll be at the same institution I'm at, but one of the things that early retirees constantly worry about is the idea of insurance, health insurance. And one of the provisions that we have that I can take advantage of is if I work for 20 years at my university, I could retire with full health benefits. So I would just be paying the monthly payments that the monthly contributions I'm making now, which is about $400 a month. So I can retire with full health benefits after about 20 years. What I'd have to do is I'd have to leave one of my retirement accounts there, so there's enough money so they could take those monthly withdrawals out, and I'd have to probably annuitize that money. But that the draw of having good health care is something that will certainly keep me around, at least in this position, probably for another 6 to 7 years. So, but I mean, I love what I do. Every day is different. The kids keep me young. So, I hope I'm not working until I'm 75 or something like that. So like a couple of colleagues of mine, but they do it because, they just love teaching and so forth. And I hope to be doing some other things, but.
Yeah. No, you bring up an interesting point too that maybe we don't touch on enough just in general is figuring out that path for you individually. And it sounds like you've been able to kind of hone in on that and what that strategy looks like for you. And it's not like a concrete mark, but I think a lot of times it's easy for us to lose sight of, I know there's a guy, Bill Perkins, that's going around on media outlets right now talking about basically spending down to zero as you die. Basically, you want to write that last check. Yeah. And his whole point really is just that don't work forever to save a bunch of money and accumulate a bunch of money just to accumulate it, because you'll never end up spending it or enjoy it or whatever, and lose out on some of the experiences or things that you might have been able to have or would have enjoyed having along the way. Not so much like, hey, yeah, write your last check at your deathbed kind of thing. But it sounds like you've got that pretty honed in, and I'm assuming your wife's on board with that as well.
Yeah, she is. I don't think I think my wife also, we both gain a lot of identity from our work. I fully admit I bought the Kool-Aid of the college professor. I actually have a jacket with, the shoulder pads on, or not the shoulder pads, but the elbow pads on it and stuff like that. I don't have a pipe or anything like that, but those scenes you see in movies and stuff like that, where the professor takes off his glasses and puts it in his mouth and says, that's interesting. That's, that's something I actually do in class all the time. We both value the idea of work and doing something that we really, really value and give us, purpose. I think when you speak to the idea of spending it down to zero and so forth is certainly it's something we don't want to do. I mean, I really want to leave a legacy for my son and for future generations. But this idea of slowing down and stuff like that is really, I really have kind of been captured by, you probably heard of the slow FI movement. Where people are coast FI, you get to a certain number, you put that in a calculator and you're like, hey, I'm financially independent. So if you didn't put another dime in, so we're pretty close to that number where if we didn't contribute another dime and we just, retired at a normal retirement age, 65, 67, whatever it is, we'd be pretty close where we wouldn't have to work if we, on top of my wife's Social Security and some other things. We'd be okay. We'd be able to live a good life. We would be able to live a really good life.
Yeah, good for you. So where do you go from here in terms of your breakout of allocation? Do you have any plans to change it, buy real estate, get involved in small business or anything like that, or happy with where you're at in the markets, mostly index funds?
Well, I'm interested in the idea of real estate. I just don't want to be a landlord or anything like that, or I haven't thought about it. I'm not very handy or anything like that. I know you can get a property manager. I hear, we could certainly do a cash out refi and try to buy some properties in our local area, a couple of properties, and they would cash flow. And I guess some of that scares me a little bit. So if I ever were to get involved in real estate, which is something that I really have thought about, especially as we continue to build our wealth, get involved where, I'm an investor and so forth, and in kind of a silent partner where you just, I'll provide the cash. You just provide me, checks or dividends or recoup my money when you sell the property or something like that. I do plan in the future as we, get a little bit further on into this bull market. I'm a believer in secular trends, meaning like, long track records of a secular bull market or bear market. And I still think the U.S. is in a secular bull. So an example would be a secular bull which you guys are probably familiar with. It was from 1982 to 2000, where the stock market went up on average, I think it was 18% over that time period. And we've had a couple similar periods. And I think we're in the middle of one right now. I think we're coming to the end. We're kind of in the late innings, but we still have a few more years left. And then as we switch out of that, I will probably invest more into a little more international allocation. The only reason I don't go back to more international is because the choices that I have in my accounts are really not that good. And I've also read J.L. Collins' Simple Path to Wealth, and he does a really good job of making the case that you don't necessarily need an international allocation because so many American companies are international. So why put that in there? But I do think that I will switch to 15, 20% of some kind of global stock market index fund or something like that. Total market index fund.
Yeah. Hey man, look, I'm with you on the international. We told Chris Hogan that when he was on the show a few weeks ago. We were like, look, man, you're telling everyone to get 25% in international, but international has been like 5% in the last 20 years.
Yeah. It really hasn't been good. And I know, Dave Ramsey says on his shows when the market turns, international does make up for it. And that is true. That's where you go into those long periods or potential long periods of, slow growth or, where the market in the US is basically, it's not going down. It's actually going sideways. So if you look at the late 60s and 70s, the market for the most part, just, it would go down, it would go up, it would go down, it would go up, but it was really going sideways the entire time. If you look at, from where it started to the end, where it started to shoot up in 1982 and the same thing, the 2000s and stuff. So I think, he's right about that, but that's so hard to predict.
Totally. And then I agree with you on the fund options. My wife and I were just looking at her options for retirement options at her company last night. And it's just, there's like 12 options or 10 options or something, 8 maybe even if you wanted equities. And it's just like, luckily hers had just a total stock market index or an S&P, but beyond that, it was really nothing good.
Yeah, I don't have really any good international index, but the Fidelity Growth has been a very, very good fund for me since I bought it a few years ago. In fact, it's one of the best. It's like performing like 40. It gained 40% the last year. I don't know how it's doing it, but I'm going to take it.
Right. Don't blame me at all there.
Yeah.
So let's just jump into some final rapid fire questions here, Jason, then we'll end with some last words of advice. So what's been the most expensive car you've ever purchased?
A few years ago, we bought a brand new Nissan Rogue, which we're still driving. So it's probably about $25,000. That's probably the most expensive we've ever bought. Brand new.
Okay. What about most expensive meal that you've personally paid for?
We've had some really, really good meals out. We like doing like those 3, 4, 5 course dinners. So we've dropped probably at least $500-$600, between the two of us, my wife and I, on kind of a date dinner and stuff like that. We haven't done that lately, but we've certainly done that. A couple bottles of wine and 5 course dinner at a very nice restaurant. So $500-$600.
Yeah. What items or experiences are worth spending more money on to you, and what's not worth the money?
I certainly think the idea of experiences. I'm a huge believer in international travel. As I mentioned, I didn't get a chance to really travel as a kid. My parents we didn't really go on vacations. I went to Mexico. I was on a plane for the first time when I was 18, and I kind of got the international bug. One of the things that I love doing now about being a college professor is I take students abroad. So I've taken them to a couple different countries like South Africa and Greece. So certainly that. And then I'm not into stuff. I think, our house is full of stuff for my son, and it's just the clutter kind of drives me a little crazy, but he's 2. So.
Yeah. Have you ever used a financial advisor?
I have not. I'm not opposed to a financial advisor. I've actually consulted with one or two, but I would probably be more interested in kind of just getting a second eye as to what we're doing and kind of developing a larger plan instead of just the investment part. That's probably what I need more help with, the larger tangibles, wills and, guardianship and all that, potential planning, tax planning, that kind of stuff, which am not very good at.
Yeah, with you there. So as much as you're comfortable sharing here, what's been your range of household income through your working life?
Well, since I got probably my big boy job, I would say that, it was with my ex-wife and stuff, we were probably making in the neighborhood of starting 80. This was back in the mid 2000s, and now we're in the 150 to 175 range, maybe 200, depending on how you calculate it.
Good income. Good for you guys. And what's your annual household spending?
This is where we have a problem. We probably spend about $100,000 a year, and that's with student loans, daycare. We eat out a lot. We are what we did before the coronavirus and so forth. So we could pay that down a little bit, but that also involves a lot of extra mortgage payments and stuff as well. So that's probably where we've been averaging it, but that includes paying on extra debt and other kinds of things.
Sure. Yeah. Any books or product recommendations or websites, podcasts, anything you listen to that's been really beneficial, influential to you?
Yeah, I think if I could just recommend a couple things, certainly, a lot of people have mentioned, J.L. Collins' book, The Simple Path to Wealth. Listen to a couple of different podcasts like Choose FI, Stacking Benjamins, that kind of stuff. I would recommend, for a book, I actually want to recommend a political book. And aside from mine, which you can go find, on the internet and stuff if you'd like, I've written a couple books, but there's a book on politics that I think everyone should read. It's called The Lover's Quarrel by Elvin Lim, Elvinlim. He's a political scientist who is now teaching at the National University of Singapore, but he does a fabulous job of kind of outlining, the two different lines of political thought that have really dominated American history. And if you want to understand a lot of the discord in America, I think it's a fabulous book to start with. It is such a great book. I love that book. I would assign it to all my classes if I could. And then the other one is The 13 American Arguments, which is another book that I assign all my students. It was written in 2008 and kind of gives you a very cursory overview of the fights and the arguments that we have in America, but does it in a really, really excellent kind of way.
Yeah, cool.
Those go outside financial stuff because I'm really, really, again, big into politics and stuff like that. But I think we need to talk more about those things, and that's something that I know this is a financial podcast, but politics and money go hand in hand, as you both know. So
no, it's interesting. I appreciate you sharing. So thank you. So just wrapping up here, Jason, what mistakes did you make, or what advice would you give to somebody who's maybe starting out in their 20s, 30s that wants to be a college professor? Is there something you're glad you did, or something you wish you would have done differently?
Yeah, I mean, the truth is, I wish I would have not taken out as many student loans as I did. I could have lived on the stipends they give you for grad school. A lot of people who are going to graduate school are given some kind of stipend by the university. So I was only making like $15,000 a year, but that was enough for an apartment, ramen noodles and stuff like that. But I felt like I needed somewhat of a lifestyle, the ability to go out, the ability to maybe, go somewhere. And I took out the maximum amount of student loans. Now I know that isn't true for a lot of people. They use it to live on and so forth. But if you could, I would encourage anybody who has some kind of stipend for graduate school, or there are ways to go to grad school for free. And I've written a couple of blog posts about that, but I would encourage you not to take out student loans. That's kind of a mission I'm trying to get my students to avoid them at all costs because of the disaster they are, currently in America. But, unfortunately, I know all too well how they can be kind of a millstone around your neck for years to come.
Yeah, well, thank you, Jason. I appreciate you sharing, and thanks for opening up. It's not an easy thing to do, so I appreciate you coming on. Thanks for sharing. Everybody, again, that's Jason, net worth of over $600,000, soon to be a millionaire. Where can people find you or get a hold of you, Jason, if they want to learn more about you?
If they would like, they can. I have a personal finance blog called Reaching Our Balance. So just go to reachingourbalance.com. I'm on Twitter at J3Edwards if they wanted to come find me, or tweet at me, DM me, or whatever. And then, if you wanted to, you can certainly probably find me on Facebook, and so forth. But, I would say the blog and Twitter would be the two most prominent places to find me.
Awesome. Thanks again, Jason. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jason.
Thanks for listening to the Millionaires Unveiled podcast with Clark Sheffield and Chase Mattinson. For more stories, investment opportunities, and information, check out our website at millionairesunveiled.com. See you next time when you'll hear from another everyday millionaire.